Thank you for standing up and sitting down. Just so you know, Steve Chaparro, who I'm about to introduce, because you came to hear him, not me. We were at Holland High School this morning speaking to an art and design class that focused on illustration and learning Adobe Illustrator. And we had a few volunteers with us, and I think we spoke to about 25 students and maybe 2 or 3 administrators. So another thing that our chapter has been good at doing is changing the format and reaching out to different schools from Muskegon, Holland, and Grand Rapids. So please continue to support AIGA West Michigan as we continue to experiment and try new things to stay inclusive and diverse. And we're all doing this through the avenue of design and different design disciplines. Now, with that, I want to introduce to you one of my childhood friends. He's from Holland, Michigan, and he moved to Grand Rapids for 1 month. And then, for some reason, I don't know why, he moved to Long Beach, California. Like, what does California have over Michigan, right? Right? Okay. He's going to share his story, so I don't want to say too much. But Steve Chaparro is dabbled in architecture, design thinking, speaking, storytelling, leadership, strategy. If I keep going, I'm really going to mess someone up, so I'll stop. But with that, Steve Chaparro is a good friend, an amazing speaker and designer, and let's give him a hand so he can come up and share with us.
Thanks, Carlos. Thank you, Carlos. But my real name is Esteban Arturo Chaparro. In the last name, what that means is, any of you Latinos here know what Chaparro means in Spanish? Can you call it out? What does that mean?
Shorty.
Yes, it does mean shorty, the short one. I remember when I was growing up in Holland, actually it was in the Kalamazoo Valley for a while. I had a growth spurt after I lived in Holland and East Lansing, and between my 5th and 6th grade, I had a growth spurt. So I was this tall as a 6th grader. I was 5'6", thank you very much, and a quarter. And I remember that I was the tallest kid in class for a long time. And then I come back years later to reminisce with my old classmates, and they saw me and says, "Man, you're puny," because they had all shot past me. And so yeah, Chaparro, it all applies. I'm really happy to be here. It is very much a homecoming for me. Very appreciative to the AIGA West Michigan chapter for the invitation. As Carlos mentioned, I did grow up. I was born in Chicago. Came to Holland, Michigan for a couple of years, and then moved to East Lansing, then back to Holland. And it was, I could honestly say that my time in West Michigan was absolutely the best years of my childhood and even possibly even of my life. And I come back and feel very nostalgic, but it's a great honor to be here and to share some thoughts with you. I want to share a little bit about my story. This beautiful woman here is my beautiful princess bride, Michelle. We've been married for 15 years. There's a story there about how far back our families went. Our families lost connection for about 30 years and reconnected when we met. And that's a long story in itself. But we've been married for 15 years, and we were able to birth these 2 strapping young men, Ethan and Brendan. Ethan is the oldest one, Detroit Tiger fan, 1984. And Ethan is 11 years old, and Brendan is 8. And they are very creative in their own right, very proud of them. They have their own YouTube channel, so if I can give them a plug, look up Chapsters TV. They have 18 episodes, and it's just a way for them to really begin to think about how to tell stories even at a young age and experiment. And just, I told them, don't worry about your subscribers, don't worry about your likes, don't worry about views, don't worry about any of that. Just do this, learn, try different things. And you can even see the progress that from their very first video to the most recent one, how far they've come along, and it's been very exciting. to see them. So as we mentioned, I grew up in Michigan. At the age of 15, we moved to California. My dad had taken a job out there. But it was not without a really important time in my life. At 9th grade at Holland, at that point middle school, physics teacher told us to write a paper on any given profession. I chose architecture, just on a whim. And it really fascinated me to the point that I continued to study about the industry. And so when I graduated high school in California, I decided to go to the School of Architecture. So I went to USC, go Trojans, USC for the School of Architecture, and then basically went into the field. But my career has been kind of like across the map. Started in architecture for 5 or 6 years, then went into real estate development because I really wanted to understand how do you create not just spaces within the four walls of any building, but how do you create full-on communities? And really wanted to understand that. When the market tanked, I took a little side trip as a financial advisor, but I called it financial architect because I was trained as an architect. So I had to put that in there somehow. And then I was able to become part of the Visionary Studios family where I now work. A little bit about our firm is that it started about 15 years ago. Our founder had spent 10 years at the Walt Disney Company and had learned a lot of lessons about spaces and stories and all the things that Disney does well. He recruited who is now our Chief Operations Officer, who was in fact a Disney Imagineer. And so Disney Imagineering, Visioneering, I think you might see the connection there, really influenced the way we work, the way we think, our processes, and the things that we do as a firm. So fast forward to today, we are a multidisciplinary firm. Just like Disney Imagineering is actually 144, I think, different design disciplines to be able to carry out this grand vision into reality. Now, we're not that big. We're very small compared to them, but those lessons of taking writers, videographers, engineers, architects, and all of these different things as a group of people that can come together to deliver whatever the design challenge is of the day. Now, what we do mostly is we do real estate development, we do architecture, interior design, and construction. We're about 50 visioneers across 5 different studios across the country, and it's pretty fun to see how that has come across. Now, but our ideology that we run by is the idea that we believe that every space tells a story, okay? Every space tells a story. You can think about any space that you've ever been to, any house that you lived in, every building, every school, every institutional building, every space tells a story. However, it may not be the story you want to really tell, okay? There are bad stories and there are good stories. There are very clear stories, there are very confusing stories. But every space tells a story. We believe that when you combine both stories and spaces, like they're actually working together, that you can actually ignite change in people. That it can cause people to think differently, act differently, even change their lives in different ways. So when we help our clients bring their stories, and when I talk about organizations, institutions, nonprofits, corporations, even every company or organization has a story. That's their DNA, their values, their mission, their vision. What is it that they are here to provide either the end user or the consumer? There's a cultural narrative that they are all trying to deliver. And we believe that that cultural narrative can be told in a spatial form, such as if you work at a corporation and they have a value for collaboration. And so they need to then provide different types of spaces that can facilitate collaboration. Because if a firm really values collaboration, but then they don't offer the space to do that, their culture and their space are telling two different things. And so what we try to do is be able to bring those two things together, and that's what we call cultural architecture. And I'll explain that a little bit more, but cultural architecture. So the idea of experience, how many of you are in the UX kind of space? All right. How many of you are in experience design? Okay. All right. So what I want to talk about is touching on some of these things that we hear a lot about experience these days. We're hearing about it more and more than we ever have. Okay. Obviously UX, user experience, the idea of when you click on an app, when you open it up and you navigate through all the buttons and all the features, and how easy is it to navigate through the app, how easy is it on the eyes, that whole experience, that it's a seamless process, that you don't have any glitches, that it's a seamless process, that idea that you want to enhance that experience all the way through. We also talk about the customer experience. That how does a customer experience your brand from the very moment that they hear about you, the moment that they go to your website? What does your website say about your brand? What does your store say about your brand? What does your product say about your brand? What does your process, if you are a design consultant, what does your process say about the experience that you're delivering your client, your customer? Another thing that's really been talking about even more, there's a new book called The Employee Experience Advantage. So the idea of the employee experience. So many times we have organizations that focus on the customer experience, but their employee experience is crap. Like they have no defined roadmap. Like how are people going to, excel and advance through the company? How are they going to get promotions? Even like we posted a job posting, we're hiring by the way, we posted a job posting and one of our designers called me out. He said, Steve, you asked us to give you feedback, so here's some feedback. I'm like, oh, okay. He says, there's nothing on that posting about our culture. There is nothing that talks about the values that we have as a company. Why would somebody come to our company if they don't understand our values? He said, the language that you have is very, very clinical. He says, there's a quote in there that says that the designer will adhere to the DNA and design code of Visionary Studios architecture. It spoke of compliance. So like, you have to just fall in line. How is a creative person gonna empathize with that? They're not gonna want to go to a company that has that type of language on a job posting. So even the employee experience begins before they become employees. And so all of these things about experience. But this idea of experience is not a new topic. In fact, it was introduced about 20 years ago in this article written by these two guys, Joseph Pine and James Gilmore, when they talked about welcome to the experience economy. The next year, in 1999, they wrote a book about it, and it became a very popular book. And they talked about experience and how that was so important. And then they talked about this wonderful idea called the progression of economic value. Wow, that sounds very intellectual. You didn't realize you were going to come and get an economics lesson today. But he says, what do people pay for? So economy is like an exchange of value for some good, okay? So let's use the illustration, excuse me, let's use the illustration of a cake. A cake in the commodities economy would say that all a person needed to get a cake was to get all the ingredients from scratch, to bake a cake from scratch. You get the flour, you get the eggs, you get the shortening or whatever you use to bake a cake from scratch. You get all of those things, and the cost of making a cake by getting all the ingredients from scratch is, it's very cheap. It's very inexpensive. In the goods economy though, they said, well, I don't want to spend all the time just getting all the ingredients. What if I get pre-packaged ingredients like a Betty Crocker box? And all I do is mix the ingredients that they provide, and voila, I put them, mix them, put them in the oven, and then bake it, and then put frosting on it, and I'm done, okay? So the cost is a little bit more. You got some effort, but you're paying for the cost of convenience on the Betty Crocker box. On the services economy, he says, you know what? I don't want to bake from scratch. I don't want to bake with a prepackaged box of ingredients. I just want to go to the bakery and just give me my cake and write happy birthday, right? So that's the services economy, where you're paying for a service. Now, the cost of that is many times the box of Betty Crocker, right? But they saw a value that I'd rather pay for the convenience than to actually go through the experience of baking the cake myself. Now, the experiences economy says, I don't even want to go to the bakery, because a bakery is you're just providing me with a cake. I want an experience. I want to have something that's memorable. I want something that's going to touch me emotionally. I want something that I can invite my friends to. So Chuck E. Cheese came about, or even having your birthday party at Disneyland. Imagine if you're having a birthday party at Disneyland. For those of us that live in Southern California, you invite 10 of your friends. You pay $125, $150 a pop, plus parking and all this other stuff, all for a birthday, when you could have just done it, from scratch. But there's a value that comes with paying for the experience, because you want your child to have a memorable birthday party, one that they will talk about for days and days, that you will have pictures to remind you of that day. So it's the idea of paying for an experience. So let me ask you this. Just kind of shout it out. What are some experiences that you can think of that you pay good money for because you value the experience? Any thoughts? Cooking class, okay. All right. Helicopter ride, okay. Couldn't you just download a video from YouTube right? But there's a drive. Okay, what else? A cruise, okay. A cruise, you pay for a cruise. You could just go on a little dinghy boat, right? But the cruise has got all included, right? You can eat all you want. You could experience all you want. What else? Concerts. We showed an image of a concert, right? What was the last concert that you went to that you talked about for weeks? Dixie Chicks. Ah. All right. So there was, although this article was written 20 years ago, there was actually somebody that kind of was ahead of his time that wanted to really pioneer this idea of a guest experience. You guys know who he was? Just any guesses? There's a theme here. Okay, so Walt Disney, all right? Walt Disney, as you may know, he started his career as a cartoonist, right? He had his share of failures, and he had these big dreams, and there were things that he wanted to do, and he was an okay cartoonist, and the reason why he did well was because he knew how to hire people, and he knew how to convey the story of what he wanted to do. He was a master storyteller. That he was able to communicate to his team what he wanted, and he was able to gather the right people around him so that they could basically tell stories in 2 dimensions. So first there was the silent cartoons, and then became with cartoons with sound, and then became cartoons with color, and all of these different things, all these Disney movies that we've all grown up with, right? Especially the animation, the 2-dimensional ones. At a certain point though, he became very frustrated and restless and tired of the idea of only being able to tell stories in 2 dimensions. He thought, is there a way that we can create stories that are in 3 dimensions that the audience can actually experience in real life and in real time this story? They can step, in effect, into the screen and be part of the landscape of the story. The houses, the buildings of that story are something that they can literally touch. And the cast of characters that are a part of that story, they can literally walk around and talk to and at least watch. So there became this idea of wanting to tell a story in space, in spatial dimensions. So these are illustrations of what we know is Disneyland. Disneyland is the happiest place on earth. You can go and you can forget about all your problems. There's no racial problems, there's no political problems, there's no problems because it's the happiest place on earth. You go and in the experience now, maybe not as much when he first launched it, but that experience literally starts before you even get there. How many of you saw in the last day a little video of a girl who was told that, she had a backpack, a Disney backpack, and she was told to open it up and take all the stuff, and she's like, every single thing that she takes out of the bag, she's just awed and awed and awed and awed. And then finally she's told that she's gonna get to go to Disneyland for her birthday, and she just starts bawling because she is so happy. So the experience of Disneyland doesn't even happen before you even take a step out of your house because of this anticipation that she loves Disney, everything Disney, and she can't wait to go. And then the idea of, you set the date, you go to the airport, you fly in the plane, you land in California or Florida or anywhere else in the world, and you check into your hotel, you drive to the park, thank you. You drive to the park, you park your car, and it's, every parking level is a different character, and then you walk to the park, that anticipation of walking to the gates, giving your ticket over, and then walking through the gates, and there are these flowers, the gates, and you take the trip from the gates to the castle and all the lands in between. What a wonderful experience. But to do that, you have to pay attention to the guest experience. Everything is part of the story. Everything's intentional. Would you see a Rubbermaid trash can at Disneyland? I'm saying no. Why not? Because are there Rubbermaid trash cans in the cartoons? No, it's not that's not part of the story. It would be off story. Every single element, there's this idea of being on stage and off stage. Even the employees, what are they called? Cast members. They're part of the story, especially if they're playing a specific character. They cannot break character. They have to remain in character the whole time because there's a very intentional approach to telling the story. Everybody has to stay on story, and there's layers and layers and layers of story that is taken into consideration to deliver this guest experience. So his work and his legacy, it did inspire us at Visioneering. We wanted to take those principles, UX principles, we want to take the guest experience and employ those to what we do. So that ideology and that methodology that was learned at Disney, we brought over to Visioneering Studios to be able to create stories in spaces. So the metrics of experience. How do we measure experience? Can we tell whether an experience is one that was, actually if I said the next line, I would give it away. How do you measure experience, the value and the power of experience? Any thoughts?
Get them to come back.
Get them to come back. What else?
Get them to stay longer.
Get them to stay longer. Yep, there's actually a very much a financial pro forma based on them staying a half day longer can actually fund a brand new park. Get that. What else? One other metric for experience. An emotional response, right? Like that little girl, whoa, she's going crazy. Okay, so what we say is the benefit and stimulation that we pay for experiences that benefit us and that stimulate some type of reaction, some type of emotional reaction. Also the idea that one metric of experience is storytelling. If after we visited or had that experience that we tell stories about how it was, you got the little girl or even us, a concert, whatever the experience is, that we tell stories about this. So we measure the value of experience by their abilities to cause us to tell stories about them. And the third one is that this experience is very consumer focused. Okay? The guest is the star, right? The guest is the star of the experience. But in these experiences, we love them because they directly benefit us. It benefits me, it benefits the I, it benefits the individual, okay? It's all about me. This whole park, this whole concert is about delivering to me a wonderful experience. But then here's that's kind of like the benefits, the positives, right? But what about the dark side of experience? What's the downside of experience? So think about it. What could be the downside of Disneyland or that concert? Let's try, if we're trying to be negative, what might be some of the downsides of these experiences? Any thoughts?
Lines.
I'm sorry?
Lines.
Lines, okay.
They're expensive.
They're expensive. Authenticity, fakery, right? Anything else? Weather, okay. All right, so I'll give the idea of like sometimes this experience, because it's very consumer based, it's almost like the idea of, hey, this experience is like a meal that's served on a table. I'm gonna pull up my chair to this experience, I'm gonna pull out my knife and my fork, and I'm gonna say, what do you have for me? And I'm gonna eat it. Let's say it's a Snickers bar, okay? That experience is like a Snickers bar because, I'm very hangry and I need to be fed that Snickers bar. So while I'm eating it, it's really good. But if you're like on a diet and you eat a Snickers bar or 2 or 3, it's good in the moment, but the moment you stop is like you almost have this moment of regret or even what I would call empty calories, okay? They're calories, but they're really not benefiting your body. Okay, so I almost feel like sometimes experiences, when we just think about momentary experiences, albeit memorable, albeit they emotional, or kind of like inciting emotions, that sometimes these moments are fleeting. Like, yeah, you can tell a story about it for 2 weeks, but really the impact on your life is 0. Right? About some of these things. So I feel like I really am trying to consider what is something deeper than just an experience. What if we were to move to something that would be the next wave that would be beyond what we would even call the experience economy? There's a song that I remember that would say, I'm so tired of being stirred, but never changed. I don't know if you can identify with those words, but I'm tired of being stirred, but never changed. There are things that get us excited and even get us inspired, but when we don't get changed by it or transformed by it, it almost becomes something that teases us and actually makes us a little worse off sometimes. That's pretty heavy, I know. But go with me, okay? So here's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about welcome to the transformation economy. So this is the idea of that would we pay for something that would be a wonderful experience, but that would incite some type of change in either our lives or in the lives of others. So this is an economy in which there would be Yodas, okay, like mentors or guides in the world that would guide these aspirants or people who aspire to change in their lives through experiences that result in sustained change. Okay? It's not something that's just momentary, just for that day or just for that weekend or just for those 3 or 4 hours. Okay? But that is something that impacts them literally for the rest of their lives. Now, I think that there's actually signs of this already happening in our culture. Okay, I think this is already happening. What I'm trying to do is bring those into the fold and say, what can we do to learn these lessons from things that are already happening? There's a report that was put out by one of the schools at Harvard that really questioned the reasons why, say, the millennial generation gathers. Okay, what is actually the reason why the millennial generation will choose to gather with each other? One of the questions that they were asking was, why are they no longer going to church? Okay, well, it's because they're finding other communities, other organizations, other places that give them what they believe they aren't finding in other places, like, say, a church. Okay, so we understand that right now we live in an economy or in a world that is more globally connected than we've ever been. Would you agree with that, with technology? But also the dark side of that is that we're the most locally disconnected. That our desire for community, our desire for accountability is something that's really strong. So this report says that people, like say specifically the millennial generation, are looking. There were 6 themes that were common in a lot of these, a lot of millennial responses as to why do they choose to gather in certain places. So they wanted to find places where they could find community, places where they could experience personal transformation, places that could result in social transformation or in finding their purpose. That's a pretty heavy thing, to want to go to a place where they could find their purpose, or be able to express creativity and accountability. Whether we realize it or not, we actually desire to be held accountable. Because when we're held accountable, it shows that people care about us, that people are noticing us. I remember, one of the things we talk about is that people want to be seen. They want people to know that they're there. So one time I noticed that there was a person in our office, our team, that maybe wasn't being noticed and wasn't being acknowledged for the contribution that they were making. So I went over to her area and I said, "I see you." And she goes, "Well, that's kind of creepy." So it can be creepy too, but I think that it does speak to something in all of us that we do want to be known. So when I think of what are some places that they are finding this, what is this an image of? CrossFit, right? How many are CrossFitters here? See, if it was in a box, you wouldn't be the only one raising your hands, right? Everybody would be there, and you guys are crazy guys and gals. Like I've been into a CrossFit box, as they call them, right? Boxes. I'm intimidated because those girls are like, they're huge. They're gonna knock me out. But so tell me, what has your experience been about a CrossFit gym? What is it about it that attracts people to be part of a place like that?
Community, and for me personally, it's that accountability. You go and be with people where it's fun, and you work out, and you know if you're not there, someone might send you a text and be like, "Hey, let's go."
Exactly. No, that's serious. I hear that all over the place. They'll text you, say, "Dude, you missed the workout. Where are you at?" It's like, and so I've heard that it's community. I've heard that it's accountability, and I've heard that it's also about transformation, because physical transformation is big. I mean, there are other organizations, like, how many of you have heard of Soul Cycle? It's kind of like this spin class that you go to, but the instructors are almost like full-on preachers and self-help coaches, and then you have a little kumbaya moment after your workout. Literally, they get together in little 2 or 3 person groups, and it's very much about expressing your feelings and all. And it's like, holy cow, this is like church. And it is, because what they're saying is this is almost CrossFit as church, or Soul Cycle as church. People are looking for reasons to gather, and they're looking for places to do it. So what we're trying to say is that we're proposing this idea of a transformation experience approach. What are the spatial experiences that people can have that actually incite some sort of transformation? How can we reimagine the spaces in which we gather, where we live, where we work, and where we play? I believe that that is the future of spatial design. And so I believe that that this statement is very true. The future of design is transformational experience. People want to go beyond just like, man, this was a great workout one day, but you know what, my life hasn't really been impacted. They want to experience some things. And the reason why I say future is because we believe that strategic design anticipates where our future is headed. You know, Wayne Gretzky wasn't a Red Wing, but he said, there's one quote that he said that I love. He says, "I don't skate to where the puck has been. I skate to where the puck is going." So when we design, do we design for today? Or do we design for where culture is going? Because it needs to last. And when we talk about design, we believe that design is in fact the process of envisioning and creating an experience that truly does transform. When we say experience, this is actually, you don't see it, but there's a line right there. He's actually going down a hill in the wind, in the sand. We believe that experiences is emotional. Brian Solis, he's a futurist, he said that experience is an emotional response to a moment. We believe that experience should be holistic, that it incorporates all the five senses. Someone said that experience is the sum of all of our interactions in the world. Not just one interaction, but all of them. It's cultural, it's social, it's spiritual, all of these different things. We also believe that experience should be transformative, that it should leave the person forever changed by them. And so that we even go from an experience to an encounter. You ever had an encounter with somebody? What does that usually mean? Sometimes it means that you had an argument with them, okay? But also it could be that you met somebody that what they shared with you completely just blew your mind and changed the way you thought, changed the way you talked, maybe even the way you acted. And so those are transformative encounters or experiences. The challenge then becomes, how can we create spaces that do elicit an emotional, a holistic, and transformative experience? So that's what we're going to talk about. How much time do I have, just so I'm gearing? 15 minutes. All right, we're doing good. So the architecture of transformative experience, that's the title of today's talk. So that was just an introduction, okay? So all of that just to get to this. All right. So I like the idea of using, you thought this was the theory of relativity, but it's actually the theory of experience, a transformational experience, okay? The E is for experience, M is for moments, and then the C squared is what I'm going to call culture craft or cultural architecture. When we talk about transformative experiences, the E, we at Visioneering, we kind of delve in what we call impact-driven design. We want to design in a way that it causes an impact, causes some sort of transformation. So the three areas of impact that we particularly work in is in these three areas. Spiritual impact, because a lot of our clients are actually faith-based organizations. They want to help people on their spiritual journey, see a spiritual transformation. So spiritual impact is one. Social impact, we work with a lot of nonprofits, boys and girls clubs. We work with YMCAs and other nonprofits because they want to see a social impact to their organization. And then cultural impact. When I say cultural, I'm talking about the internal culture of corporations and organizations. We also, there's a book that is written, I kind of cited this earlier, about Nancy Duarte is a founder of a firm called Duarte Inc. They're a communication design firm, and they wrote a book called Illuminate. And it's how do you ignite change through speeches, stories, ceremonies, and symbols. And so when they talk about this curve is basically the life stage of a company. That there's a dream stage, there's a leap, a fight, a climb, and then arrive. And then when you arrive, you have to redream, otherwise you're going to decline and die. Okay? So then how do you install different moments at each one of those stages? Moments of inspiration, moments of decision, moments of bravery, moment of endurance, moment of reflection. So then the question that becomes, where we come in like a Visioneering, is how can you design spaces that help create and sustain these moments? That's a heavy challenge to look at. So Winston Churchill, when we talk about culture craft or cultural architecture, Winston Churchill, this is one of my favorite quotes by Winston Churchill. He says, "We shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us." Okay? So he's using buildings, but you could insert whatever your work is. We shape buildings, we shape students, we shape whatever you insert as to the kind of like the byproduct of your work. Whatever we shape ends up shaping us. And you think about even in your spatial in your offices or where you work. So there's some lunatic actually took this quote and then readapted it to what he wanted it to say. So this guy says our culture shapes our environment, right? Our mindsets, our behaviors, our values, whatever we believe is important will shape our environments. Thereafter, the environments that we live in will end up shaping our culture. So I truly believe that whatever space you live in, whatever space you work in, whatever space you play in, you choose it for a reason. Usually it's because there's a story there that you identify with, and then there's a space that exemplifies it. So, one of the things that we do is one of our monikers is that we want to act as trusted stewards of story and space. That steward word is a pretty heavy word. But we say that a lot of times spatial storytelling is about when the story of the organization aligns with their space. How many of you have ever been to a place that their cultural mission statements are really good, their website's good, but when you go into their office, it's like, oh my gosh, is this the same organization that I saw on the website? Like, their office doesn't speak the same language as their branding. Or the opposite, their space is beautiful, but their culture is crap, right? Because they got leadership issues, undefined mission, undefined vision, all these different things. And there's a misalignment, there's a separation between the two. But what would happen when those things actually become aligned with each other? That the space tells the proper story of the organization, and that the organization's story is in line with the space. We always start with story. We take some time to ask a ton of questions. We don't come in with preconceptions. In design school, they teach you that never begin a design project with the end in mind. Like, that's not what Franklin Covey says. Franklin Covey doesn't say he says begin with the end in mind. But if you allow yourself to have a fixed idea of what the outcome is going to be at the very beginning, you defraud its potential. But if you go in with an initial thought and you allow the idea to grow and grow and grow, the potential of that idea will be much greater than you ever imagined, because you allowed the process to unveil the end solution. So in this idea for an organization, this would be meaning, purpose, values, and transformation. On the space side, and I'm almost done, all right, we want to look at 3 spatial realms. And so this is where kind of the spatial diversity comes in. Having diverse types of spaces. And I'm going to give you 3 examples of projects that we've done just to kind of give you an idea of what that may look like. So the first realm of space is what we call the space inside. So this is a project that we did, but let's just apply it to this building here. The space inside is literally within the 4 walls of this space. It's everything that we do. It's internally focused. It's about the people that are in the building. This was a project that we did with an elementary school where they wanted to create within their existing 1950s building spaces that acted as hubs or as flex spaces where teachers and students could come together to reimagine the future of education and have kids imagine what their future could be like. Well, we were able to put together this idea of being able to have 3 realms. So there was a realm of underground, at ground level, and then at the atmospheric level. And this was at the ground level. So the trees, the colors, the environmental graphics, the materials of the finishes were telling the story of what this school wants to do to help the children reimagine their future. So the space inside. Most architecture focuses inside the 4 walls of the building. But here's the next level, is you look at the space between. The space between buildings is what, in design, on graphic design, you call this white space, right? It's the space that is white behind all of the images, behind all of the letters. It's that space that offers some sort of visual relief. Well, this is spatial relief, okay? So in a way that this was another client that basically took over a 5-acre, what used to be an old farm, dairy farm, that had been taken over by drug addicts and became the plight of the city. Well, again, a church came in, bought it, understood the story in the past and the history, and didn't just wipe it clean, but embraced the idea that there was hurt, that there was pain, that there was even cows on this. And so what can we do to take some of those elements and put them together, in a sense, redeem this old farm into a place that redeems people. And create these open spaces that not just the members of the organization, like it's not a members only site, but it's a place that says, hey, here's an open door, this open area, this park, the space in between is for the community. It's not just for us, it's for the community. We want this to be seen as a public park, the space between. If you look at even that space, if for some reason this door was open during the day, people were allowed to come in and experience that space over there. And that's an example of the space between. The space beyond. This was another church that took over a dairy farm. I don't know why it keeps happening with churches and dairy farms. But instead of 5 acres, this was 50 acres. That initially they thought that they were going to wipe everything clean, tear down the barns, fill up the creeks, take everything off site and wipe it brand new. Basically just gut everything, bulldoze everything and make it something new. Well, when we came in, we said, no. There's a story there that has been there for decades and decades and decades. That's the story that we need to tell of reclaiming old facilities. Use the creeks as part of the idea. Use the panels from the old barns to be cladding for new buildings. Reuse a barn for a wedding venue. Even those metal things that cows put their heads through to eat the hay, you know what? Carve those up and make them bike stands. Whatever you can do to restore all the material from this old farm. Well, we did this master plan, then we did a first building, and there was a guy that used to live in the area that would pass this site all the time and kind of saw how it was going to be dilapidated and just didn't pay any attention. But then he saw one time that he came by and there was something else happening on the site. Now, this is not by any means a faith-based or spiritual talk, but this guy had said that he had felt like he had gone wayward in his life and felt like the God that he served at one point was no longer going to be happy with him because he had basically messed up. I don't know about you, but I mess up all the time. I don't know why my wife still kisses me and accepts me, right? Because I mess up all the time. I go wayward, not in a bad way, just. But then again, dude, look at me. Look at this right here. You can understand why maybe. So he kind of felt like God is not going to accept me. And he found himself attracted by this space, didn't know what it was. He drove onto the site, and before he knew it, there was people that were whisking him into the church just to invite him in. That he was captivated by their generosity and the smiles on their faces. And he realized, hey man, this is the church. And he said, but look at what they've done with this old stuff. These old materials and these old, things that they've restored, and they made something beautiful out of something that for any other person they would have just cast aside and thrown away because they had served their purpose. But they didn't do that to these barns. They restored them. Then he began to think in his own way. Again, this is not a faith-based talk or anything, but he says, well, if these people can restore old barns like this, maybe the big guy, the big man upstairs, could restore this guy here. So he was baptized in a concrete cow trough, and he saw transformation in his life. So that's just one example. Whether you're a Christian, an atheist, it doesn't matter. The idea of being able to have spaces that can tell a story, that can incite some type of emotional, spiritual reaction into your life that can cause change in your life. This is the same project, just looking at it from a different view, 3 dimensions about what that looks like. So here's my call to us. What would it look like if we could all work together, to link arms, to collaborate, to innovate together, to rethink, to reimagine, not just spaces, but reimagine organizations, reimagine people, reimagine new brands, new user experiences in a way that could literally transform the world. So that's my call, is to consider it. Just consider what that would look like. And I'd love to talk with you about it. I'd love to ask questions as well. But thank you very much. Appreciate it. Hope it was beneficial. Thank you. So what I'd love to do is, if you have any questions, I'd love to see, we have the microphones in the back that come around. But we'd love to see if you have any questions, even comments, give me the good, the bad, the ugly. I'm fine with that. I'm a big boy. But any thoughts, any comments or questions? We have one up here.
Give me 2 more minutes.
So I was wondering if any brands stick out that sort of work well with this idea of transformative experiences.
Yeah, I think like the YMCA, as a nonprofit, as an organization, they have this idea of wanting to bring change to people's lives. Like we saw, like on one project that we did with them, where they showed all these stats of how many people's lives have been impacted and literally lives have been changed by, and I forget exactly what the stat was or the infographic that it showed, but YMCA's, a lot of cause-based organizations, even organizations when you think of as a business model, maybe not as a spatial model, but even though their spaces do reflect this ideology, like the Toms of the world, Charity Water is another one. So a lot of them are in the nonprofit or social enterprise sector. Some of them are social based, but still for profits, like, Tom's, I believe, is one of those. A lot of, I would say probably 80% of our work is in the faith-based world. So that is one that definitely, when we're involved, we try to bring that into the process. So I know that's not exactly a full answer to your question, but I'd love to actually discover that more. Maybe that's a book or a blog post that we can write that talks about not just social organizations, but even corporations that have that mindset. But there are a lot of organizations that do want to reflect their culture in their space. So when you go into their space, like even a Facebook, a Google, some of these more tech companies or creative agencies, the spatial diversity within their offices do allow for different types of activities that do reflect the values of their company. So that's what we love. Anyone who wants us to just do a tenant improvement of their space and it's just real cut and dry probably wouldn't hire us. They would hire us if they see a value to their space reflecting their story. Does that help? Okay. In the back there, yes.
So I am not a designer, and I admire designers, but I work in the nonprofit world, and we want to think that we're producing some change, or at least impacting the population that we serve. And we have been trying to tell our own story, and I wonder if you believe that it takes an outsider to tell the story to the actors. Like, do you find that the people that are in the midst of the story, are they able to tell and see their own story, or does it take an outsider? And I find it very hard work to tell your reality, and then you filter it, and then you tell me my reality back. How that happens in grant writing. You want to write a grant, you're going to tell the story. The person puts it in writings, and then they tell it back to you. And design is kind of the same, but I wonder if maybe the actors are usually blinded. And how do you reflect that to them and tell them the story that you see? Put in the transformational part on it.
Well, I think what we've experienced many times is that when we work with an organization and we try to, in a sense, a lot of the organizations may not be able to verbalize or communicate their story. So then our job becomes to help them define, discover, articulate, express their story. And that means sometimes we'll bring in other consultants to help them clarify that, bring clarity to their vision, their mission, and values. But we can't contrive that on their behalf, right? We can't say, hey, I see where your vision is. Let me tell you what your vision is. Like you can't birth vision in them. The vision needs to come from within them. It is our job as an outsider to help them discover it. That's the reason why we don't say that we are visionary studios, because we're not the source of the vision or the mission. The vision needs to come from the leadership. It's mainly the leadership of whatever organization it is. And our job is to help those leaders discover, articulate, clarify, bring clarity to that story, and then help the leaders be able to communicate or facilitate conversations so that they can then properly communicate what that story is to people. Here's the problem. If I go in as a story mercenary, let's say, and I come as a consultant, and I can prescribe to people what their vision, what their story is, and I see what your story is, this is what it is, and they didn't birth it from within themselves, the moment I leave, all of that's gone. And that's what happens many times is we as consultants and even as designers, we can try to contrive that on their behalf, and we basically form it for them. It's not birthed from them. The moment we leave, that function of even innovation consultants, creative consultants, all these specialists, like I'm very wary of any type of specialist that goes in to help an organization, because if he or she doesn't help the organization develop a culture of innovation, or a culture of empathy, or a culture of collaboration, it's a cultural issue that needs to happen. So a lot of times we recognize that there are organizations that are unwilling to go through that process. And if they're unwilling to go through that process, it's better for us to just not take them on as a client. So I don't know if I completely answered your question, but I believe that story needs to be discovered and birthed from within the leadership first, because a lot of times we will discover that the leadership of an organization is actually lacking in what we call leadership capital, and that there's an absence of leadership, and that when leadership is empowered to bring some of these stories to light, then the architecture, the branding, then just becomes a tool of what's already there. That's just some of the thoughts that we have about that. So I don't know if I completely answered your question, but those are some of the things we want to be careful about really empowering people to discover that on their own. We facilitate a process. So I think he was over here first, then we'll come to you.
So I was thinking about Disney World and about how I remember how clean it was. And so the idea of like a candy wrapper will take you out of the experience.
Right.
And I usually think of architecture as an additive thing. You're building new things, but is there anything that you can focus on in particular that you need to remove in order to allow the story to go?
Well, I think one of the things we really encourage our clients to do, like even if we go into their existing space, we say, okay, let's experience your space together as a first-time guest would. Okay, so let's get in a car and drive down the street a block and then turn around and then basically reapproach your site. So literally, as they're driving up to the site, what do they see? What does the grass look like? What do the signs look like? Like, is the site identified in a certain way? Does it help them navigate the parking lot? What does the parking lot look like? Can they identify which door they need to go into? And like, what do you see as a first timer? Because a lot of times as just like, if this is our home, you don't see certain things, right? Because it just becomes blurry. But if you go in as a guest and try to experience that space as a first timer, you start to see these things. And you start to say, okay, well, what would help me? Like, if you go to, like, say, a YMCA for a first-time parent and their child, like, if they don't know how to navigate inside the building, they're going to get anxious and probably not come back again. Like, if the Disney experience, like, they didn't have any signs to navigate them through the park with no map, it would be crazy. And then the kids crying and all this stuff, like, it's a horrible experience. So even the idea of a guest experience is just try to eliminate any sort of decision making that they have to make. But even the wrappers, worn corners and all those little things. Now, it may be an issue of cost, but a lot of times it's not. It's an issue of attention and intentionality. Question?
Yes. Do you notice any consistencies between working with the for-profits and the nonprofits? And do you foresee any potential collaboration in the future in terms of getting outside of their own markets and whatnot, and kind of treating it as the bigger picture?
You know, I think I have seen that happen. I think it really comes down to just what is the culture and mission of, say, the for-profits, whether they really see that, you know, the biggest thing that they can do is maybe to partner with people. I really think that strategic partnerships is the way that we need to work in the future. We can do way more together than separate. And, you know, there are many times even organizations that are doing the same things in different fields. If we just got together and worked together, we could do so much more because we can learn from each other. For-profits a lot of times bring financial resources. A lot of times the social companies bring social capital, like their credibility in the community. So those two things together can really help to bring some of those collaborations. But if it's not valued by the leadership of either type of organization, it's not going to happen. What was your second question? Second part to your question?
Yeah, do you foresee any collaboration
Yeah.
between the two?
Well, I think that's
like directly aligning these objectives?
yeah. I mean, I think if, thank you. It was I think like what I said about strategic partnerships is definitely a part of that. Is if there are, you know, organizations that maybe their bottom line is different in terms of like the financial versus a nonprofit, but they share the same values, they can come together based on that shared value and excuse me, and work to excuse me, my visioneering cup here. They can work together to collaborate. I think, again, strategic partnerships is the absolute way of going, and that can happen between for-profits together amongst themselves and non and for-profits as well. So absolutely, I do see that happening a lot more in the future. Any other question? Sorry for my hackathon there. It's another version of a hackathon, right? All right, yes. One more.
So the examples you showed earlier of the spaces and how you were able to sort of like mow it all down and develop just like, you know, concrete in a building. Is your company more towards sustainability? Mm-hmm. You know, of like preserving the natural resources and incorporating, especially those streams all over? Like, that breaks my heart to see any type of development like that and knocking down trees. I've noticed with buildings, in my opinion, that are unsuccessful in Michigan, where they're just, you know, putting big parking lots everywhere, it later on becomes something that's desolate,
Right.
becomes something that's an eyesore that you don't want to see. So is that something moving forward that you always incorporate?
We try to, if that is a value for the client. We believe, we didn't realize how much sustainability is in fact part of our DNA and culture. That is a big part of it. That's the reason why in that particular case, we said, no, don't mow down the trees, don't fill the ditches, you know, don't throw away the barn panels, because not only do we have a duty to be sustainable, but there's a beauty to them as well. Now, it doesn't mean that sustainable architecture is always cheaper. That's not always the case. In fact, in many cases, to have a sustainable building, it might cost a little bit more in some cases, but we believe that is a value of ours. We even want to resurrect what are called brownfield sites, that are environmentally contaminated sites. Like, we believe that there's a way to, in a sense, redeem those types of pieces of land that, say there was a gas station there and it's contaminated because it has the gasoline drums below ground and no one wants to touch it because it's contaminated. Well, I've been in a real estate development world where I know that there are ways to basically extract those things and bring in, you know, healthy dirt, so to speak, to make that land usable. Because a lot of times, especially in urban infill areas where there are these pieces of land that are basically forgotten, forsaken, and left for dead, essentially, but there are ways that you can actually come in and like kind of like resurrect those parcels of land. So yes, it is very much a part of what we look for moving forward.
Can we give him a hand, please?
We have one more. We'll talk right now afterwards, okay? All right, thank you.
Steve, you say right there. So,
she has one more question.
okay, we'll do one more question. Go ahead.
I just wanted to, I remember when I was young, I was in South America, I never went to Disneyland, but I wanted to go, even though I didn't grow up.
Yeah.
But I knew that the world had this area where you went and you could see the future. And he told you, when you grow up, you're going to ask for lunch from your dining room table. And you're going to do this and that, and it was telling you the story of the future. And people were drawn to that. That doesn't exist anymore, is my understanding. And I wonder, in this generation, future looks dark because it is not sustainable, because the environment is in crisis, and this transformational way of looking at the spaces.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it has something to do with trying to give us that hope. It's about hope to the future. It's like we can do something now to make the future look better.
Right.
And I think that it has to tell the story of redemption. And I would just want to thank you, because this talk has kind of centered me in understanding what our organization looks like from the outside world. You have described what is happening to us. And the members of my team here can attest to that.
I read your email. No, I'm just kidding.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So that's a representative from the West Michigan Hispanic Center, so everybody knows. Well, first I have to say, Karen, those boots, you were crushing it. Before you leave, check your boots out. Are you single? Are you single?
Yes.
Oh. Brother gotta get his game on? Okay. So, I want to share with you a mission statement. We will seek, build, and sustain intentional and diverse relationships that create a more inclusive design environment. And by you being here tonight, that's what you have done. So thank you for supporting AIGA in West Michigan, and enjoy your evening.
Thank you.